As the president's immigration policy rolls out, the reports confirm that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency has conducted nationwide raids. Coloradans are seeking sanctuary. Local activist and undocumented immigrant Jeanette Vizguerra made headlines after she found refuge in a local church. In previous administrations, immigrants were seemingly safe from deportation in an unofficial sanctuary policy restricted to churches and schools. Patty, Colorado was going to get into headlines some way on immigration. We just said it's too much of a hot issue here for us not to get in there. I'm not sure if I thought this would be the way we did it. What did you think of this particular issue, and does it have staying power?
Well, let's not forget we made national headlines when Arturo Garcia took sanctuary in the same church, not when Donald Trump was president, but when Barack Obama was president. So it does have precedent. He was there, I think, like 9 months. The congregation discussed it. They were all behind it. They're behind it in this situation. No matter what Trump's immigration policy is going to be, and whether we have an executive order or whether we have lawsuits or what's going to be coming down the pike, I don't see that the feds are going to go raid this church. They have literally bigger fish to fry, and you don't need, well, of course, who can really predict what the feds want to do right now? But if they are using any common sense at all, this is not a murderer. This is a woman who, yes, was in the country illegally, but she is not a dangerous criminal. Let her be there. She may be there a very, very long time, but I don't see them coming in to raid. This is such a hot button issue. You saw what happened yesterday with the Day Without Immigrants, where immigrants, largely Latino, but from other countries too, legal and illegal, stayed home from school, stayed home from work, just to show people what kind of impact they have on the economy. So we're going to see more of those actions and protests too.
David, it's an unofficial policy, so I read that as being more of a tradition, less a law. Do you think the current administration will take advantage of the fact that it's not a law?
No, for the reasons Patty said. Sanctuary as a legal concept existed in Old English law, where if you can hightail it to a church and they let you inside, you might be able to hang out there for a while, and under some circumstances you might get off the hook for the crime you'd committed, or you might get a lesser punishment, like you'd committed a murder, but you might be able to come out and basically be able to cop a plea to manslaughter. And this has roots back in the Old Testament and the practice of the ancient Hebrews. It was abolished by Henry VIII in the early 1500s, and Henry VIII, by the way, is a good guy for people who want to read something historic that also can remind us of some current events and leaders. Although our current president is only half as great as him, because only on his third wife. And he hasn't killed any of his wives, which is way ahead of Henry VIII. So much more of a big league good president. 0 spousal homicides by the current president. But the sanctuary has no legal role in American law. It hasn't existed, by the time settlement began here, it was long gone. But in practice, it's been respected. So in the 1980s, people who were fleeing from the war in El Salvador, which was caused by Russian-backed communists who wanted to impose tyranny on El Salvador, some people fleeing the war came to the United States illegally, and some of them were given sanctuary in churches, and then a lot of them actually got legalized by the 1986 Simpson-Mazzoli law. And the current policy has been to respect churches and not do raids in sensitive places, such as churches, unless there's some compelling need. For the reasons Patty said, there's not a compelling need in this case. And by the way, kudos to Westward, which has been covering Ms. Vizguerra's case for a long time and doing a good job. But all the hysteria plays into Trump's hands. There's no way the federal immigration authorities can go and deport everybody, or even everybody they want to deport. But the more you ratchet up the fear level, and you have these raids from last week, which were really not that much more than what often went on in Obama's first term, but you create a national hysteria about that. The AP comes out with a fake news story today saying that Trump is thinking out of calling the National Guard to do deportations, when in fact the draft memo is they're just going to deputize National Guard and other militia in border states to be able to do immigration arrests, and the guards are already out in some of those states on border patrol. The more that will encourage self-deportation by illegal aliens who were worried about what's coming and said, let's just get out now while we can, kind of on our own terms. So the more fear that the media helps create in conjunction with the administration, the more they help the administration's goals. And likewise to all the activists who are trying to ratchet the fear level up to 11.
Penn, what's the political effect of what we're seeing? Because I understand what David's point about that fear can ramp it up, and that the raids are, right now, from what we can tell, nothing different than what we've seen in previous administrations. But is there a political effect?
Sure, there's the potential for a political backlash. You know, every administration has had immigration enforcement actions designed, but they're usually targeted towards undocumented immigrants who are somehow engaged in criminal activity or some other illegal activity. The problem with what the Trump administration is doing is the appearance is that that's no longer the requirement. It appears to be just a sweep of people, primarily people of color, to have them deported. And so there's the possibility, I think, of a backlash forming. What's going to be interesting is, you know, we all read things, and Trump supporters appear to say, yeah, this is exactly what we wanted. But I don't know how large a group that is in America anymore. I think some of his other missteps and some of the other issues, and frankly, the way he handles himself and speaks to people, I think that group, in terms of his supporters, are shrinking. And I think it's generating more outrage and unnecessary panic. And sure, you may get the byproduct of self-deportation, but I think there is a political backlash that is yet to come.
John, what about on the local level? I've heard different police chiefs worry that community policing becomes a problem because you have people who are fearful to come out and be a part of that process with police and giving information, things like that. Do you think there's going to be a detrimental effect based on what we're seeing so far?
Well, there definitely could be. You know, in deference to David, going all the way back to Henry VIII and all of his machinations, this sanctuary situation was big in the 1800s when blacks were using the Underground Railroad and making their way from slavery to the north. Churches always took blacks, you know, ex-slaves or former slaves or current slaves into sanctuary, and it was up to the slavers who were, you know, commissioned by the South and by the plantation owners to come north and to actually rescue those people, and they you know, to actually take them back into slavery, whereas the whites in the North would do a rescue, take that person out. So sanctuaries have been around not only, you know, in olden days back to the Bible, but they've been around the 1800s. So you know, while this young lady happens to have some sort of criminal record, I mean, maybe that would be the only reason I would see that the Trump people and ICE would go after her. But at the same time, this is one of those situations where, you know, Denver doesn't meet the criteria for a sanctuary city. They don't, you know, foster the federal laws that go into it as well. So I'm not sure if this is going to play out where they'll just say, well, she's got a criminal record, we're going to take her.